World of Warfare presents
The Battle of Iwo Jima. Following the capture of the Marshall Islands by American forces in tandem with withering air assaults on the Japanese fortress positions on Truk Atoll in the Carolines in early 1944, Japanese war leaders shifted their defensive strategy by establishing a line of defensives northward from the Carolines to the Marianas, westward to the Palau Islands and the Philippines. Despite their attempts to fortify an inner defense line for the protection of their home islands, after the Americans established control of the Marianas, daily American bombing raids over Japan began to diminish the empire's ability to wage war. Japan's ability to defend the Volcano Islands was further weakened by the loss of nearly all of its naval assets during engagements in the later half of 1944, along with the loss of warplanes and experienced pilots who had perished fighting first in the Solomon Islands in 1942, followed by the Battle of the Philippine Sea in mid-1944. During a two-month defensive lull following the Battle of Leyte in the Philippines and the Allies' planned invasion of Okinawa, Allied war planners set their sights on Iwo Jima, which housed two Japanese airfields that allowed Japanese fighter planes to intercept long-range B-29 heavy bombers intent on striking targets in Japan. War planners further reasoned that the control of Iwo Jima would allow long-range P-51 Mustang fighters to escort and protect American bombers en route to Japan. Tasked with defending Iwo Jima in June of 1944, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi understood implicitly that his garrison could not win a direct confrontation with Allied forces, but instead, the general hoped to inflict such devastating casualties to American, Australian, and British forces in an effort to force Allied war leaders to rethink their invasion objectives of a direct attack on the Japanese home islands. Modeling the defensive tactics employed in the Battle of Palau, Kuribayashi broke with traditional Japanese military doctrine by establishing his defenses far inland from Iwo Jima's beachheads, constructing a complex system of fortifications and tunnels throughout the island. And since his tunnel network had not been completed by the time of the Allies' assault, he built two separate defensive zones on the island, one at Mount Suribachi in the south, a second to the north. Beginning on June 15th of 1944, U.S. Navy warships and Army Air Force warplanes began the longest and most intense preliminary bombardment campaign ever launched in the Pacific Theater, pelting the island relentlessly for the next 9 months to come. Unaware of the island's tunnel defense system, American intelligence officers and war planners believed that most of Japan's forces on the island had been destroyed, leading many to conclude that an amphibious invasion of Iwo Jima would take no more than a week. In advance of the main Marine landing force, Major General Harry Schmidt requested a 10-day heavy bombardment of the island in advance of his planned amphibious assault. However, Rear Admiral William H.P. Blandy refused Schmidt's request, opting instead for a 3-day all-out assault on the island beginning on February 16, 1945, a decision that was deeply resented among the Marines in the landing force, despite a saturation of bombardment that left no part of the island unscathed. On the night of February 18th, the large carrier Task Force 58, under the command of Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, arrived off Iwo Jima, along with the overall commander for the invasion, Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, aboard his flagship USS Indianapolis. The following morning, the first wave of Marines landed on the southeastern coast of the island, along with 6 Navajo code talkers who sent and received over 800 messages over the next 2 days, all without error, leading 5th Marine Division Signal Officer Major Howard Connor to note that were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. Landing unopposed just before 9 a.m. on February 19th, Schmidt's Marines soon found themselves bogged down by loose volcanic ash that covered the island, amassing men and materiel over the next hour before the Japanese opened up with machine guns, mortars, and heavy artillery fire from positions on Mount Suribachi that decimated the first wave of Marines. To make matters worse, the Japanese employed reinforced steel doors over their artillery positions, which they slammed shut after each punishing round of fire, making it difficult for counterfire from Marine artillery and U.S. Navy gunners to destroy each Japanese position. Despite American efforts to clear bunkers with flamethrowers and grenades, as soon as a bunker or pillbox was deemed free from enemy combatants, due to the enemy's use of elaborate connecting tunnels, bunkers were quickly reoccupied by wave after wave of fresh combatants. Unable to gain traction atop the choking black ash, amphibious Amtraks were abandoned for a deadly slog across open positions. Despite the punishing conditions, men of Naval Construction Battalions 31 and 133 braved enemy fire to bulldoze roads off the beachheads, eventually allowing the Marines to progress inland from their exposed position on the beach, leading historian Derek Wright to note that in virtually every shell hole, there lay at least one dead Marine. Taking Airfield 1 by 11:30 that morning, the Marines were able to hold the field despite a fanatical banzai charge by over 100 Japanese soldiers, before Colonel Harry the Horse Liversedge and the fighting men of the 28th Marines drove across the island at its narrowest width, effectively isolating Japanese forces dug in on Mount Suribachi. Conducting a two-pronged attack to neutralize the rightmost landing area located at the quarry, 900 men from the 25th Marines' 3rd Battalion saw some of the bloodiest fighting of the day, leading to an 83.3% casualty rate by nightfall that left only 150 Marines in good fighting condition. When Ground Force Commander Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith read the casualty reports aboard his command ship USS El Dorado, Smith remarked to reporters that, "I don't know who he is, but the Japanese general running the show is one smart bastard." The bloodshed continued under the cover of darkness when Japanese troops sprang out of previously unseen tunnels, many luring the Marines into the open by yelling "Corpsman" in English in their pretend attempts to pass themselves off as wounded Marines. In light of the relative ineffectiveness of their firearms, the Marines quickly shifted strategy to 8 Sherman tanks equipped with flamethrowers known as Ronson or Zippo tanks, while P-51s of the 15th Fighter Group became the norm in nighttime attacks against Japanese positions, against Japanese soldiers who almost always fought to the death. By the morning of February 23rd, the above-ground surface of Mount Suribachi had been effectively cut off from the rest of the island, yet 2nd Brigade 28th Marine Commander Lieutenant Colonel Chandler W. Johnson understood that the below-ground tunnel networks were still alive and deadly. In response, Johnson sent 2 small rifle companies up the volcano to define routes up the north face of the mountain, followed by a platoon-sized patrol from E Company under the command of First Lieutenant Harold Schreier. Reaching the summit with only scattered sniper fire, Schreier and his men attached an American flag to a length of Japanese water pipe found amidst the battle wreckage, raising the flag at the summit of Mount Suribachi, which became the first foreign flag to fly on Japanese soil. Photographed by Joe Rosenthal, the image of 6 men from E Company's 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines became quite possibly the most iconic image of the entire war, becoming the only photograph to win the Pulitzer Prize for photography in the same year as its publication. Reprinted thousands of times before the end of war, Felix de Welden would use the image to sculpt the Marine Corps War Memorial, which has been located adjacent to Arlington National Cemetery since 1954. Despite losing their defenses at Mount Suribachi, the Japanese would fight on in the north, where Marines undertook the arduous task of seizing the Motoyama Plateau, including Hill 382, Turkey Knob, and the amphitheater, which together became known to the Marines on Iwo Jima as the meat grinder. Fighting bogged down yet again as the Marines sought to take control of Airfield No. 2 in the center of the island. Casualties piled up rapidly as the Japanese yet again reoccupied previously cleared bunkers, pillboxes, and tunnels. Mounting casualties eventually forced the Marines to pivot to night attacks without any preliminary artillery attacks, which effectively killed Japanese soldiers while they slept atop Hill 362. On the evening of March 8th, the Japanese struck back under the command of Captain Samaji Inoue and his 1,000-man force when they charged American lines in typical Banzai fashion. The attack led to 347 American casualties, including 90 fatalities, while the Marines counted 784 dead Japanese soldiers the following morning. That same day, elements of the 3rd Marine Division reached the northern coast of the island, splitting Kuribayashi's remaining forces in two. Although the island was pronounced secure at 1800 hours on March 16th, 25 days after the landings, the 5th Marine Division still faced off with Kuribayashi's main force located in a 700-yard gorge at the northwestern end of the island, until the Marines destroyed Kuribayashi's command post with 4 tons of explosives. Sealing off the remaining caves on March 24th, the next day, a 300-man Japanese force, led by Kuribayashi himself, launched a final counterattack near Airfield No. 2, leading to heavy casualties for the 5th Pioneer Battalion and the 28th Marines, 53 killed and 120 wounded. Once the island was officially declared secure at 0900 hours on March 26, the U.S. Army's 147th Infantry Regiment found itself locked in a bitter struggle against thousands of Japanese holdouts over the next 3 months, where the Americans utilized flamethrowers, grenades, and satchel charges to root out the enemy, ultimately killing some 1,602 Japanese soldiers. Triumphant in the end, the Americans' victory at Iwo Jima witnessed more than 26,000 American casualties, including 6,800 dead, only to be outdone at the Battle of Okinawa from April 1st to June 22nd, which saw 62,000 casualties, including more than 12,000 killed in action or missing. The Battle of Iwo Jima also holds the dubious distinction of suffering a higher casualty rate than those of the Japanese, although Japanese combat deaths numbered 3 times more than American KIA. The battle also saw the loss of the USS Bismarck Sea, the last U.S. aircraft carrier sunk during World War II, along with 20 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters and 11 Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. The USS Saratoga was also so severely damaged that she was removed from combat or transportation duties for the remainder of the war, while 31 Grumman F-6F Hellcats and 9 Grumman TBM Avengers were also destroyed in the kamikaze attack on the Saratoga. In hindsight, given the high number of American casualties, the perceived importance and long-term significance of capturing Iwo Jima to the outcome of the war remains contentiously debated, particularly in light of the fact that the Marines, who took the brunt of the casualties, had not been consulted in the planning stages of Operation Detachment. As early as April of 1945, mere months before the end of World War II, retired Chief of Naval Operations William V. Pratt stated in Newsweek magazine that the expenditure of manpower to acquire a small, God-forsaken island, useless to the Army as a staging base and useless to the Navy as a fleet base, one wonders if the same sort of air base could not have been reached by acquiring other strategic localities at lower cost, which no doubt offered little solace to the families of so many lost men. Even so, the lessons learned on Iwo Jima would serve as a fitting guideline for American forces during the Battle of Okinawa 2 months later, not to mention the planned invasion of the Japanese homeland, which was thwarted by President Harry S. Truman's decision to drop a nuclear bomb on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, followed 3 days later by an equally devastating detonation over Nagasaki. Of the 21,000 Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima at the start of the battle, only 216 were taken prisoner, most captured only because they had been knocked unconscious or otherwise disabled, while those soldiers that held out in the island's man-made tunnel systems eventually died from injuries received by Marines intent on eradicating their lingering threat, making the Battle of Iwo Jima one of the bloodiest engagements of the Second World War.